The storm had rolled over the Montana frontier like a herd of iron-hoofed horses. Wind shrieked through the valley. Pines bowed, and along a narrow wagon trail, a lone stagecoach creaked under the punishing night. Inside, pressed against the rattling wall, sat Clara Whitmore. She held her shawl close, though the wool was damp with rain. Her heart pounded, not from the storm, but from the future waiting at the end of this ride. A letter, a promise, a man she had never met. Clara was a mail-order bride. Back in Ohio, she had been called many names. Some whispered, some shouted. Too big, they'd said. Too heavy for a husband to carry in life. Suitors had passed her by. Brothers had teased her. Even her father, once kind, had urged her to wed any man who would have her. So when a rancher out west wrote to the matrimonial agency and asked for a strong wife to help him tame land and bear children, Clara had prayed this was her chance. She had written honestly of her size, of her strength, of her willingness to labor. His reply had seemed plain but firm. Come. A good woman is worth more than gold. Now, here she was, journey's end. The coach wheels skidded in the mud as it stopped before a dim-lit settlement. Rain slanted across the wooden storefronts, and lamps flickered behind cracked glass. Clara swallowed. Her hands trembled as she stepped down into the storm. And there he stood, Elias Turner, a broad-shouldered rancher, face shadowed by his hat brim, his boots sunk into mud. His eyes flicked over her once, twice. Then they narrowed. You're bigger than I was told. The words struck harder than the wind. Clara's voice faltered. The letters, I said. Elias shook his head. His jaw hardened. No, won't do. I need a wife who won't slow me down. Someone who can ride fast, light across the plains. He paused. You'll eat more than you can earn. Each syllable cut. The townsfolk, drawn by curiosity, lingered on porches, watching. Snickers floated through the storm. Clara's cheeks burned. I came all this way, she whispered. That's your fault, not mine, Elias muttered, turning his back. The stage driver cleared his throat. Coach is moving on, miss. If you got no place. Rain hammered harder. Clara's satchel slipped from her grip, spilling a plain dress into the mud. She bent, hands trembling, but the fabric soaked black. The laughter from the porch deepened. For the first time since childhood, Clara did not cry. She only stood, drenched, rejected, and alone. Lightning slashed across the heavens. And in that flash, from across the muddy street, she saw him. A man, towering, rough-bearded, shoulders broad as a barn beam. His flannel shirt clung, wet against his chest. His hands, scarred and powerful, held the reins of 2 oxen. He didn't laugh. He didn't look away. He only watched her, steady, with eyes like the deep woods after rain. A lumberjack. The storm swallowed all else. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to bow. She gathered her sodden satchel, clutched it tight, and stepped into the unknown frontier night, alone but not broken. Somewhere behind her, the lumberjack's gaze lingered. The story had only begun. The town of Bear Creek was no place for kindness. Clara learned that in her first week. She rented a cot above the tavern, traded what few coins she had left for stale bread, and stitched torn shirts for miners and drifters just to keep from starving. Nights were lonelier than she'd ever known. The walls shook with laughter and fiddle tunes below, yet her room was silent but for the scratching of her needle. Rumors spread fast. They always did in towns like this. The fat bride, they called her. Too heavy for even a lonely rancher to take. Their laughter carried through the floorboards, sometimes cruel enough to make her hands shake as she pushed the needle through cloth. But Clara bore it with quiet pride. She would not let them see her break. Tears only fed gossip, and gossip fed the town. So she pressed them down, held her chin high, and worked until her fingers bled. Still, hunger gnawed deeper each day, and each morning she woke with less hope than the last. Beyond the town's edge loomed wilderness, dark, endless pines rising like cathedral spires, rivers swollen with spring melt, ridges where wolves prowled unseen. Men spoke of storms that drowned valleys whole, of bears that shredded campsites to ribbons. Yet something in Clara longed for those woods, for a place beyond mocking eyes, beyond the whispers that clung like thorns. It was there, among the timber, that she saw him again. The lumberjack. His name, she would learn later, was Jonas Holt. He worked alone, felling trees no other man dared touch, giants whose trunks took 3 men to circle. Clara watched from a distance once, hidden on a path, as his axe bit clean and sharp. Each swing was purposeful, his body moving with raw rhythm, sweat and rain mingling on his brow. When the massive pine finally cracked and fell, the earth shuddered as if in respect. There was no mockery in him, no softness either, just a man and his work. One evening, as Clara carried a bundle of mended shirts to the trading post, her tired feet slipped in the mud. The bundle spilled across the track, shirts sinking into dirt. "Need a hand." The voice startled her. Low, rough, steady. She turned, and there he was, Jonas, his shadow stretching long in the fading light. Clara swallowed hard. "No, I can manage. You drop your work." He bent, lifted the bundle with scarred hands, careful as though it were spun glass. He held it out, not mockingly, not pitying, just steady. Clara hesitated before taking it. "Thank you." He only nodded once and stepped past her, boots crunching in the mud. But something inside her shifted. Over the next days, Clara noticed small things. A sack of flour left by her door, no note. Firewood stacked neatly behind the tavern when nights turned bitter. Once, when 2 drunk miners cornered her in the alley with slurred threats, Jonas appeared without a word. He didn't raise his axe. He didn't need to. His shadow alone sent them scattering like rats from a lantern. He never asked for thanks, never lingered. His silence was heavier than most men's talk, but not cold. Solid, like the earth underfoot. Still, doubts gnawed at Clara. Why? Why would such a man notice her, when others only mocked? She was no beauty, no delicate flower. Her hands were calloused, her body large, her laughter long buried. But when Jonas's eyes met hers, there was no judgment, only recognition, like he saw in her the same thing he carried, solitude. One night, thunder rolled beyond the valley, and rain streaked down her window pane. Clara sat alone with her mending, needle trembling between fingers worn raw. She whispered into the silence, almost afraid of her own voice. "Perhaps I was meant for more than rejection." And out there, beyond the tavern's walls, she heard it faintly. The thud of an axe striking deep wood, steady as a heartbeat. The wilderness was calling her name. And in its echo, she realized she was not as alone as she believed. Snow thickened in the pines as winter pressed its claim. Clara had grown used to the quiet knock at her door, the small gifts left without explanation, the flour, the firewood, the cleanly mended strap of her satchel. She never saw the giver, but she knew. Jonas Holt moved through town like a ghost, saying little, yet his silence carried more care than the words of a dozen laughing men at the tavern. Still, gossip had its way. Bear Creek tongues wagged crueler than January winds. They called Clara pitiful, a big-boned drudge, who had no business dreaming of company. They called Jonas a misfit, too, half-wild, too long in the timber, better with axes than people. When his name tangled with hers in whispers, the laughter came sharper than the first time she'd stood in the rain, rejected. Clara bore it, though her cheeks burned, for she had learned that words were lighter than work, and neither words nor work could freeze her heart if she tended it well. One evening, returning from washing linens at the creek, Clara found Jonas waiting by the path. His flannel was torn at the shoulder, blood darkening one sleeve. In his hand he held no axe, no burden, just a quiet steadiness that unsettled her. "They came at me," he said simply, voice low. "Men from the tavern. Thought it'd be fun to test me on account of you." Her stomach dropped, anger swelling like a storm. "Because of me?" Jonas's eyes softened, but he didn't flinch. "I told them you deserve better." They didn't take kindly. The weight of it struck her deeper than insult. For the first time, someone had stood in her name, not against her. Clara reached for his arm, steadying him as he swayed. Her hands, strong from labor, did not tremble. From that night, something unspoken lived between them. Not romance, not yet, but trust. Jonas brought her wood not only for warmth, but to carve small shapes. A bird, a horse, a child's toy left carefully on her table. She stitched his torn flannel with patience, mending the jagged seam as though it were flesh of her own. Winter deepened. Hunger nipped at Bear Creek harder than pride. The tavern's laughter dulled when bread grew scarce. Yet Clara's lamp glowed each night, steady, her hearth tended with wood split by hands rough but kind. Neighbors began to notice. Not her size, not her solitude, but her endurance. And beside her, the quiet lumberjack, scarred and steadfast, no longer seemed the misfit they once mocked. It came to a head one frozen dawn when fire broke in the stable. Horses screamed, men shouted, and panic spilled across the town square. Jonas was first to rush in, axe in hand, hacking open the doors. Smoke swallowed him whole. Without thinking, Clara barreled in after, her broad frame cutting through flame and fear alike. Together they dragged out the beasts, gasping, soot staining their faces black. When the flames fell to embers, the crowd stood stunned. The tavern men, who once laughed, lowered their eyes. The rancher who had turned his back that stormy night muttered something like shame. And in the silence, a child whispered, "They saved them." Clara's chest heaved, her face streaked with ash. Jonas leaned on his axe, exhausted, but when their eyes met through the haze, neither spoke. They didn't need to. For the first time in Bear Creek, they were not seen as oddities, but as something stronger. Two souls who had chosen each other in defiance of cruelty, building dignity from rejection, warmth from ruin. And though Clara knew storms would come again, storms of hunger, of gossip, of endless work, she also knew she would never face them alone. Jonas had given her that. And she him. The snow fell quiet after, blanketing the town in white. In its hush, the beginning of something lasting stirred like embers refusing to die. Spring thaw came slow to Bear Creek. Snowmelt trickled from the pines, swelling the creeks into roaring ribbons of brown water. Mud swallowed the roads, and wagons groaned under the weight of supplies hauled from distant towns. For most, it was a season of relief. For Clara, it was a season of reckoning. The fire had changed things. Where once she'd been laughed at, now townsfolk nodded as she passed, some even with hesitant kindness. But respect was a fickle coin. The same men who mocked her weight now tried to erase their jeers with hollow greetings. Clara carried no grudge, though the memory of that storm-soaked rejection still clung to her like a scar. What mattered was Jonas. He healed slowly, his scarred arm stiff from the fight in the stable. Yet he swung his axe again, steady as ever. His silence was still his language, but Clara had come to understand it. The tilt of his head, the brief curl of his lips, the way his calloused hand brushed hers as he passed her woodpile. Their bond lived in gestures, not grand declarations. Yet the town would not let them be. One afternoon, as Clara walked back from the market, a voice cut across the square. "Mail-order bride." The rancher sneered, the same man who had once turned her away. His words carried, sharp as a whip. "You still waiting for someone to pity you proper?" Clara froze, the old wound splitting open. But before she could speak, Jonas stepped forward from the crowd. He held no weapon, no anger flashing in his eyes, only a calm steel that quieted the square. "She wasn't waiting," he said. His voice was rough, but each word struck like an axe in a timber. "She was surviving. While you mocked, while you turned your back, she kept going." The silence stretched long. Faces turned, whispers died. The rancher tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow, swallowed by the weight of Jonas's words. Clara stood taller, not hiding her frame, her shoulders square against the eyes that once judged her. From that moment, the balance shifted. She was no longer the rejected bride, no longer a source of mockery. She was Clara Holt in the making, because whether spoken or not, Jonas had chosen her, and she him. The seasons turned. Together they built something small but steadfast, a cabin on the edge of the forest, its chimney curling smoke into the sky. Jonas felled the trees, Clara hewed the beams, and side by side they raised their walls. In the evenings, she stitched curtains while he carved shelves. Their life was not easy, but neither had ever wanted ease. They wanted dignity, warmth, and the quiet bond of two souls no longer alone. When winter came again, harsh and unrelenting, Bear Creek found itself knocking at their door. A child with fever, a widow with no wood, a family whose roof collapsed under snow. Clara and Jonas gave what they had. Fire, bread, shelter. Not because the town had earned it, but because they had known what it was to be cast out. And so, slowly, Bear Creek changed. The laughter that once cut now softened, replaced by respect that could no longer be denied. People began to see Clara not for her size, but for her strength. They saw Jonas not as a misfit, but as a man whose silence spoke more than the loudest tavern cheer. On a quiet night, as snowflakes drifted past the window, Clara sat by the fire with Jonas across from her, his axe resting in the corner, her mending set aside. She looked at him, really looked, and spoke words that had been waiting. "I thought I was meant to be rejected," she whispered, "but maybe I was just meant to wait until the right eyes saw me." Jonas's gaze lifted from the fire. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he rose, crossed the room, and took her hand. His rough palm, scarred and strong, folded around hers as if sealing a vow that needed no ceremony. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire burned steady. Clara had not found pity in Bear Creek. She had found something harder won, something truer. Love born not of appearances, but of endurance, respect, and the quiet certainty that neither storm nor scorn could undo what they had built together. And in that there was triumph.